From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Tuesday. I hope so far, anyway, you're having a good day. We're going to open up the phone lines, invite you to join in the conversation. We're talking a bit of politics this morning. As you know, the impeachment trial begins in Washington, D.C. We've been talking about it, how long it lasts, what's going to go down. I think some things are already pretty much understood. We know that former President Trump will not be there testifying. He will not be called. He declined to show up, which was his option. We know that it's highly unlikely that he will be convicted in this Senate trial, because they need 17 votes from the Republicans in the Senate to do so, along with all the Democrats who will vote that way. And that's just not going to happen. So the purpose of it and how it's going to play out, what the lawyers are going to do, how things start today, all of that. We'll get into some of the little basics of it. We can take a few of your phone calls on your thoughts about the larger picture and where we go from here. And just an interesting conversation, something that has not really been done before. And one of the questions being asked and is being challenged is, can you impeach a former president? Meaning he's no longer in office. So is he out? Is that okay to do? Yes or no? And there's differing opinions on that, which I think is going to be part of the opening arguments this morning by both the defense for former President Trump and the prosecution. To talk more about this is our professor. I guess you're kind of like the professor emeritus here with us as you come and join us on a fairly regular basis. Professor John Vale over at MTSU in the Honors College there. And I know you followed this really closely, and we'll get to phone calls. But Professor, I think this morning, as I was reviewing how things start today, they're saying they're going to give like 16 hours potentially to the two sides to start off with arguments on whether or not this is even constitutionally allowable. What do you understand about what those arguments will be about?
I'm not sure that's right. I think what they're going to do is I think they're going to have like a day of arguments or 6 hours or so of arguments on that question. And then each side gets 16 hours to present its case.
Okay. So that's right.
Not
6.
About that.
Yeah, I think you're right. But yeah, what is that 6 hours?
Yeah. This reminds me a little bit about the kid who was asked if he believed in child baptism. And he said, believe in it, I've actually seen it happen. And so, it sounds like we're probably going to have a second trial of Mr. Trump, whether everyone agrees that it's constitutional or not. We had a webinar at MTSU last night of about an hour, and there are some precedents for, particularly if someone has been impeached while they're in office and then having the trial afterward. They include the first trial, actually, of the first impeachment in the U.S., which was of Tennessee U.S. Senator William Blount. And then there's another case from 1868 where a former Secretary of War tried to resign in order not to be impeached, but they impeached him and had a trial anyway. Now, he was not convicted, and so the precedents can sort of be interpreted either way.
You know what's so screwy about this, and I think confusing for a lot of Americans who, as they pay attention, maybe superficially wonder, the purpose of impeachment. And I just remember thinking back to when I was a kid, and I was young, but I remembered when they, pursued the impeachment of Richard Nixon, and then of course, President Clinton. And you think impeachment. The purpose of impeachment, I thought, was, well, a president did something wrong, and we want to remove him from office. But then you realize, no. The impeachment itself is in the House, and they vote, and they impeach him, and it's kind of symbolic, like, boom, we impeached you. And then it goes to the Senate, and almost always in the Senate, it never gets to the point where they're actually physically removed and thrown out of office. So what is the purpose of impeachment? And then the follow-up with what happens in the Senate. And if it is to remove someone, well, this president's already gone. If it's not, is it more symbolic to kind of get on the record all of the lousy things this person allegedly did?
In that respect, it would be sort of like censure, wouldn't it?
Right.
And there's not actually a constitutional provision for censure, but it has happened a time or two. If I counted correctly, we've had 14, I think we've had about 18 total impeachments in U.S. history. And as far as I can tell, 7 of those resulted in actual conviction and removal from office, and they were all lower federal judges.
Okay.
This is only the third president, of course, in U.S. history to be impeached, his second time, of course. One of the fascinating things is how many impeachments we've had within the last 25 years, which I guess is now 3. And wasn't that much time difference between Nixon's and Clinton's. So we're obviously using it more frequently. Some people think it's being overly politicized. My own judgment is if there were ever a case for impeachment, this is probably it. I mean, you have someone contesting a valid election and seemingly, calling people out in the streets to intervene rather than to accept the results.
Yeah, and it seems to me that is it your belief, and maybe this will be a constitutional question that's decided this week, I mean, then that it is constitutional to pursue this after a president has left office. Do you believe it stands muster?
I do. I don't think it's a slam dunk. I think this is a little easier. I think where it would be really tricky were if the House had done nothing prior to Trump leaving office and then tried both to impeach and convict. But since they got the impeachment in while he was still in office, and some of them have said there's no December exception or January exception to impeachment. Somebody can't wait to the last minute, do something really egregious, and necessarily expect to get by with it just because they're leaving office on January 20th.
Let's get to the heart of the matter here then, and maybe look at the prosecution's case and the defense case for the former president. The issue here is whether or not he is the one that, urged on and was responsible for the insurrection, for that crazy riotous mob that made its way to the Capitol on January 6th. Is he responsible for that? Were his words responsible for it? And so I'm wondering then, okay, his defense, what we're hearing right now from his defense team is that this is free speech, that he said that he didn't want them to be violent, and that, there's not a case here. Is that the way you understand kind of where the defense is going?
That's pretty much it. And the briefs, the defense filed a brief of about 85 pages just yesterday, which added quite a bit to it. Part of it is obviously the timing is very important. This occurred on the 6th, which is the day that the Congress is opening the ballots to decide who the next president is going to be. Trump gave an inflammatory speech. Under free speech law, though it has to produce an imminent threat of lawless action, we know that lawless action occurred. His attorney's, the argument yesterday was, well, it occurred, but it wasn't Trump. It was pre-planning by a lot of other people. And very interestingly, yesterday's brief was very clear. What happened is intolerable. President doesn't have anything to do with it. I think part of it, if there are witnesses, and we don't know if there are, but I think the most interesting witness to have would be someone who was in the White House watching Trump as Trump watched the demonstration. Because the news is reporting that, I don't think he had a violin there, but, that he was jubilant over seeing the possibility that maybe the election was going to be overthrown. And if that was the case, then I think he's much more responsible than, if he was there, making urgent calls to his supporters to quit and whatever. In my judgment, that didn't come much later. I mean, this is after people are saying, let's hang Mike Pence, let's kill Nancy Pelosi, where are they? And the like.
I agree. That would be very interesting to get insight into that. It's interesting to me also when you talk about witnesses that I've heard it sounds like the prosecution is not going to necessarily call witnesses. Maybe there will be one or two, but they're going to depend heavily on the video. And sure is a lot of this. And I was actually listening to NPR this morning driving in, and they actually over the last several weeks have spent time pursuing the more than 200 individuals that have been arrested in connection with, the raiding of the Capitol and getting their statements and finding out what it is they said about why they went. And to date, more than 24 of them, many of them on Facebook and otherwise, were very clear. They said they were going and doing what they were doing because their president told them so. And I mean, it's just very clear. Say, well, he said to go. He said he was going to come down with us. And if he told us to go and do this, we were going to do it. I mean, they're going to have witnesses, from much of this video statement basically laying that out. I think anyone from the outside looking in, and I know this is political, who looks at it and says this president had absolutely nothing to do with what happened is just flat wrong. Now, whether or not you want to hang it all on him to the point where he should be convicted in this, there may be a debate there. But I'm sorry. I mean, clearly he said, let's march on down there, okay? And he said he was going to go with them, though he didn't go. I think that's pretty powerful evidence. I don't see how the defense overcomes that.
Well, what's interesting is, his own supporters, if they're going to get off, they pretty much have to blame Trump. And if he gets off, he has to blame them. So you have sort of a divergence in what each of them has at stake here.
It was no surprise to you that he didn't pardon any of them, was it?
I worried about it right up to the end. I think a lot of us did. He did issue a lot of pardons, but many of them went to people who had stuck by him during the first impeachment.
Yeah, well, I think pardoning him, I think the reason he didn't pardon them is because he felt that would hurt his case.
No, I
because
think
that's kind of like pardoning his minions that he sent there. Now I'm going to protect them. So I think he had no choice. While he may have maybe wanted to pardon some of them, if indeed he appreciated what they were doing, he couldn't do that because that would have made his case all the worse. And so he's looking out for himself.
So it appears.
Yeah. We'll take a break on that note. When we come back, we're going to take some phone calls. Joe and others, you're there, 737-7587. What do you think? And what do you think of them going through this, the fact that it is pretty much a foregone conclusion that regardless of the evidence and whatever's brought up, they're not going to have the 17 Republican votes they need in the Senate to actually convict him in this Senate trial. So what's the purpose of this all along? We'll get into that and more with our friend John Vale, professor at MTSU, right after this.